Okay, everyone. Good morning, guys. Or whatever time it is. Good afternoon or good evening sa iyo. Kung aling oras na. Today, I'm gonna show you domain and range. Di ba, remember sabi ko sa iyo, ang domain is the value of x. And whatever value input for x, that will be your domain. It says here, list down all the possible domain and range for each function. Pero we don't need to list down the range. All you have to do is to list down all the possible domains. Diba, remember this one, it talks about what is the restriction of the domain. Ibig sabihin kung may restriction ba yung domain sa function na to o wala. Like for example, you remember last time what we did before? Yung domain at yung range. Like halimbawa, we have this one. For example, we have 3x plus 6, yung ginawa ko last time. What is the domain? The domain can be a set of all real numbers. Ito naman, yung ulit yung may factor sa baba. 12 divided by x minus 6. Ano yung domain? The domain can be a set of all real numbers except positive 6. So, yan. So, that's the game that we're gonna do right now. I-list down na namin kung alin yung domain at kung alin yung range. Ang domain ay ibig sabihin ng lahat yung mga values sa value ng x. Okay? We list down all the domains. So, number 1, alin yung domain dito? What is the domain in number 1? The domain in number 1 is very easy. Ang domain dito ay set of all real numbers. Kasi nga diba sabi dito, f of x is equivalent to 2x minus 1 divided by 2. So 2x minus 1 divided by 2, look, the function can be defined in many ways. Because if x were any number, this can still be considered a function. Kahit pinat mo sa graph, it's still a function. Walang restriction dito. Kasi nga, remember what I tell you about the restriction of the function? If the square root were a negative number, and at the same time, the divisor is equivalent to 0. So this one, wala tayong restriction. Next, number 2. X minus 2 is equivalent, divided by x plus 8. Alin yung restraint dito? Ang restraint dito ay negative 8. Bakit negative 8? You know why? Look at the denominator. Ang sabi dito sa rules, ang denominator ay hindi pwede maging equivalent sa 0. Kung naging 0 yan, automatic, undefined na yung function. So how do we solve for the restricted domain? First, let's set our variable equivalent to 0. So ganito yung mangyayari. Ayan, so ganito ang sitwasyon namin. Diba, remember, x plus 8 is equivalent to 0. So the first thing that you need to do is to set your denominator equivalent to 0. Tama? So x plus 8 equals 0. Now, you know already what to do. Apply inverse. X is equivalent to negative 8. So, therefore, what is the restricted domain in number 2? The restricted domain in number 2 is the set of all real numbers except negative 8. You know it's already negative 8 if you were to calculate this in your head. Pero I just want to show you the solution for more emphasis. Next, number 3. H of x is equivalent to 1 divided by x squared minus x minus 6. For this situation, since we know that the variables in the domains in the denominator, the thing that we need to do is to set our denominator equivalent to 0. Remember, our goal is to find the restriction of the domain. What is the domain? What can the domain be equivalent to? Otherwise, if we have that domain, the function will be so undefined. So that's why we need to set that variable equal to 0. So if x squared minus x minus 6, so what is the value of x that makes the restraint of the function? I-list na namin. So we work this out here. X squared minus 1x minus 6 equals 0. Tama? Kaya that's why nga you need to master quadratic equation because you know naman when you do lots of things like this, you need to master this. Kaya that's the restraining activity. So remember sa quadratic equation, the activity is what two numbers that you multiply because you know in a quadratic equation, x can have two values. It can be on the left and it can be on the right. Remember, in FOILing method, we have inner, outer, first, last, inner, outer. Diba? That's the FOIL method. What two numbers that you can multiply that you can get negative 1 and that you multiply together to get negative 6. So if you get stuck, you can do the cross method. The answer that we want is right here, negative 6. And dito sa baba, we want negative 1. So what two numbers do you think are compatible to multiply in order for you to get negative 6? How about let's try 3 and 2? Because 3 and 2 multiplied together gives you 6. 3 and 2 are also good numbers that add up to 1. But what's the sign? We need to have one positive and one negative, since when we multiply the numbers together, we're supposed to get a negative. Because different signs is equivalent to negative. Which one? Yan, it should be negative 3 because it says here negative 1, diba? So negative 3 and positive 2. So x is equivalent to negative 3 and x is positive 2. Then set it equal to 0. Then we solve for each one. X minus 3 equals 0 and x plus 2 equals 0. Add 3 to both sides. Then our domain must not be equivalent to 3. Positive 3. Subtract 2 to both sides. And our domain should not be negative 2. So yan. So therefore, what is the domain? The domain here is x squared minus x minus 6. And if I were to double check that, let's input the value, see if we get 0. 3 squared is 9. Negative 3, 9 minus 3 is 6. Positive 6. Positive 6 minus 6, that is 0. So tama, undefined. What if it were negative 2? Kung negative 2 yan, negative 2 squared is negative 4, is 4. Always positive because a negative base raised to a power whose value is even, is always positive. So positive 4 minus negative 2. That's the same as adding 2 to give you positive 6. Minus 6 gives you 0 din. So either way gives you 0. Very good. That's number 3. Next, number 4. Item 2-4. I of x is equivalent to square root of x plus 4. This one, remember what did I tell you? Our square root should not be equivalent to a negative number. Because if we have a negative number, you will play a game called imaginary numbers, which will make the function so undefined. So what do we do for this situation? Ang gawin na namin ay ganito. Diba remember it says here, x must not be should be greater than 4. So let's see how we're gonna do this. First, let's type the equation. X plus 4 should be greater than 0. Kasi we know the number should be greater than 0. If you were to take the square root of any number, it should be greater than 0, not negative. For example, we take the square root of negative 1, that's an imaginary number. So that's extraneous. So hindi pwede yan. So dapat positive 1 to give you 1. Now how do we do this? It's the same as what you did before when you solve algebra in equations. But this time this involves an inequality. So x should be greater than negative 4. Yan. So dapat x should be greater than negative 4. So that is exactly what the value of our domain is. The domain should be greater than negative 4. Because if it were negative 3 plus 4, that's equivalent to 1. Negative 2 plus 4, positive 2. Negative 1 plus positive 4, positive 3. And so on. Very easy, right? Next, number 5. In this situation, this is a bit tricky. J of x is equivalent to 2 times the quantity of x minus 5. Did you know that x minus 5, if we were to do this solution, and then all divide by negative 4 x squared plus 100. How do we solve for the value of x here? We know technically it's supposed to be 5, right? 5 squared is 25 times negative 4 gives you negative 100 plus 100. Automatically it gives you 0. So we know it's positive 5. But do you think negative 5 also works? Yes. You know why? For one reason, remember when you have a negative base raised to an even power, it's always positive. Diba? The same numbers give you the same numbers. Give you the squared numbers. And the same signs yield positive. So therefore, that's a negative. So that's 5. 5 or negative 5. Now let's solve the problem. First, the first thing that we need to do is to simplify. I think for this situation, pwede tayo mag-factor out ng dalawa. We can opt to factor out 4x squared and 100. Here's how. Diba remember ito yung solution? 4x squared plus 100 equals 0. We can simply factor out 4 and 100. Factoring out by the GCF, what's the GCF? 4. Because 4 times x squared gives you x squared, diba? And then 4 times what gives you 100? 25. So therefore, it's going to be like this. 4 times the quantity of x squared plus 25 equals 0. Now that we've already factored this out, we can simplify our equation better. So now we're just left with x squared minus 20 plus 25 equals 0. Diba? Ay, wait. Kasi po, diba remember, this is negative 4. Negative 4x squared. So, dapat, diba remember, we have to factor out by 4. So, that's why it's still a negative x. Diba? It's negative 4x pala, not positive. So, we're supposed to factor out by negative 4. So, diba remember, negative 4, if we factor out the positive, that'll be positive 4 be factored out. So, dapat that's supposed to be, ano yun? Negative x squared minus 25 equals 0. We can factor everything out by negative 1 to make the x positive, right? Or para sabay na, we can factor out negative 4. Para direct to the point. Because 4 times negative 1 is negative 4. So we factor out negative 1. Therefore, this should be x squared. Positive 25 divided by negative 1 equals equivalent to negative 25 equals 0. Hey, this reminds me. It reminds you of the difference of two squares, right? Because x squared minus a number being squared, that's the answer. That is the difference of two squares. And we know that we can solve this in two ways. Either we do this x factor, x times x, and then positive 5 and negative 5. Diba? X times x is x squared. 5x, negative 5x. Diba remember ganito siya? X plus 5, x minus 5. This becomes negative 25. Negative 5 times x, negative 5x. X times negative 15, x times positive 5, positive 5x. X times x is positive x. Then add. It's just like when you do multi-digit multiplication, right? But this is involving binomials. Start with the constant, then start with the first term. And then first term to constant, then first term to the first term. And then you write your answer here. Then align it in groups so that when you add it, it makes it more convenient and more easier. This one simplifies to 0x. So our final answer is x squared minus 25 na lang. That's one way. So x can be negative 5. So x must not be equivalent to be negative 5. X may never be negative 5. And x may never be positive 5. Those are both the answers. Another way in how you can do it is this. This is also another way. You can also put 25 on the positive side. Diba? Adding 25 to both sides of the equation, you have x squared is equivalent to 25. Then take the square root of 25 and you will end up with two solutions. So we take the square root of both sides. Therefore, x can just be left with negative 5 or just positive 5. Either way. Diba? So yan, that's confirmed. That's very easy, diba? And take note, another thing that you can also do here, you can also factor out to x minus 5. So that can be simplified, x minus 5. And then that negative 4 can be factored out. So yan. But never mind, we don't care about that. But I just want to do this just to show you how creative I am. Next, number 6. In number 6, we have p of x is equivalent to 2x minus 16, all raised to the 1/2 power. How do we solve for the solve for the domain? Very easy, diba? And remember, according to our law of exponents, we know that any number or any expression or quantity or group that is raised to the 1/2 power or any fractional power is always translated to a root, depending on and with such that the denominator will refer to its index. Like for instance, since the fraction is 1/2, we know we're just taking the square root because the number 2 on the denominator of the exponent is always the square root. So this is how we're gonna write it. It's gonna be like this. The square root of 2x minus 16 is equivalent to 0. Right? Now we need to solve for x. To get rid of the square root, we need to square both sides. So squaring both sides, 0 squared is just 0. 2x plus minus 16 squared, applying the laws of exponents, diba? Just like that. And then you have this one again. They're being multiplied together. One of them cancels, diba? So you're just left with 2x minus 16 equals 0. Actually, for this situation, you can factor out. Factor out everything by divide everything by negative 2. And x minus 8 equals 0. Add 8 to both sides. And then, wait, it's not supposed to be equivalent to 0. Because it's rooted, it should be like this. Greater than 0. We need numbers that are greater than 0. So therefore, x is supposed to be greater than positive 8. So therefore, that is the domain. The domain should be greater than 8. To verify if this were true, going back to our rational equation, because let's say for example 2 minus 8, 2 times 8, 2 times 7, that's negative, that's 14. 14 minus 16, that's not correct. You'll end up with a negative number, which is extraneous. Try negative 6, negative 12. Try 6, 12. 12 minus 16, negative 4. Hindi pwede. Although 4 is a good number to be taken out by a square root. So dapat it should be greater than 8. Yun yung sagot ng domain namin dito. Next, let's go to item number 17. For the sake of item number 17, also you can see it. Pero we know that it's 3x minus 7 quantity is raised to the negative 1 power. You know, according to the laws of exponents, any quantity or value that is being raised to the negative 1 power is always the same exponent written in the base. But the denominator is always 1. The numerator is always 1. So, it can be translated as, it is translated as 1 over 3x minus 7. Hey, now we're back to solving for the domain in the denominator. So this is just very easy for you. You know what to do. Basta, it's very easy for you. You just apply lang the skills that I taught you before. Although, for some students, if they see something like this, they say na, ayoko na talaga to. Parang we never experienced negative exponents or fractional exponents. Pero take note, that one, it still implies the application of laws of exponents that we taught you before. If you can only master laws of exponents, you'll be able to answer some crazy algebraic equations or expressions that you see right here. Kaya nga, all these math skills you need to learn. Sorry for excessive talking. Let's go back to our domain. So what's the domain in number 7? Ano yung restriction ng domain? 7/3. So therefore, the domain can be a set of all real numbers except for when it comes to positive 7/3. If it were 7/3 in the positive direction, automatically that will make the function undefined. So if I were to do like this, 7 over 3, 3 times 3 over 7, the 3's cancel, 7 minus 7 is 0. So, undefined. Hindi pwede yan. Next, let's go to number 18. For number 18, you can't see the fraction, the function. Pero, I can see it. It says here, it's x plus 4 quantity raised to the negative cube. I'll write it for you para hindi kayo mahirapan. So, ang function namin dito sa number 18 ay r of x is equivalent to x plus 4 raised to the negative cube. Diba? And then, it's being multiplied by 2x plus 8 raised to the first power. So, being multiplied by 2x plus 8 raised to the first power. So, that is our r of x. Actually, what we can rather do here, we can factor this out. We can translate this one into something first. So, let's translate this x plus 4 first. So, we know we have a negative exponent. So, if we have a negative exponent, it is the same as the exponent is written on the denominator. But the exponent is still the same. So, that's x plus 4 cubed in the denominator area. And then, on the right side, we have, it's being multiplied by 2x plus 8 raised to the first power. But it's in the positive, so it just stands there all by itself. Just like that. Multiplied by 2x plus 8. Diba? Hang on, I think we can apply factoring. This one can distribute because 1 times 2x plus 8 is the same as 2x plus 8 over x plus 4 cubed on the denominator, right? And wait a sec, did you see that we can factor this out? How can we factor? We can factor 2x plus 8, dividing both sides by 2. Therefore, we have 2 times x plus 4 over x plus 4 cubed, right? Again, let's distribute. 2 times x is 2x. 4 times 2 is 8. Yan. And then, remember, if I were to write this in expanded form, this would be 2x plus 4 in the numerator. And then in the denominator, we have x plus 4 times x plus 4 times x plus 4. Did you know that one of these guys will cancel? And now what we have na lang is 2x plus 4, then x plus 4. Now, can we solve for the domain? So, yeah, and this also implies the application of laws of exponents. Remember, if you have the same base, you can simply add the exponents. But since we're dividing, we just subtract, diba? Okay, anything raised to the negative power is word subtraction, di ba? So yeah, now we have the positive 2 squares. So now what is the value of x? We know that it's supposed to be negative 4. Because if we set them equal to 0, we know that negative 4 is not the right answer. Right? So therefore, we put x plus 4 equals 0. We just only solve for 1 because the other one is very identical. Alright? So therefore, x should not be negative 4. If I were to put negative 4 there, that will automatically become 0. And 0 times 0 times 0 automatically makes the function undefined. And thanks to the 0 property of multiplication, anything else multiplied by 0 is just 0. Kahit na may mali ka, let's say for example, in the second x plus 4, if that x there were 1, and then the first one is 0, automatically it's 0. Diba? So automatically 0 yan. So therefore, x should not be equivalent to negative 4. So therefore, number 18, what is the domain? The domain is the set of all real numbers except for negative 4. Very good. You're learning quick. Last two problems. In number 9, it says... Okay, so therefore, number 9, we have s of x is equivalent to negative 8x plus 36 raised to the first power, x plus 6 raised to the 1/2 power, times the quantity of 2x minus 9, all raised to the 4th power. So how do we write this in expanded form? Ganito kasi yung mangyayari. Diba, remember, let's start with 8, negative 8x plus 36. We know that negative 8x times 36 goes like this. Negative 8x plus 36 is like this, diba? Just written normally. Nothing, raised to the first power lang. And then x plus 6 raised to the 1/2 power, it's the same as taking the square root of x plus 6. Diba? That is the one. Taking the square root. Because remember what I tell you? If you have fractional exponent, we know it's always rooting it. And then we have 2x minus 9 raised to the 4th power. It's a negative exponent, so therefore it's written on the denominator. You can write that as 1 over 2x minus 9 quantity raised to the 4th power in positive form. But since we know things to identity property of multiplication, any numerators multiplied by 1 is just itself. So therefore, isusunod na namin dito sa baba. Okay? So 2x minus 9 raised to the 4th power. Hey, wait a minute. Do you think we can factor out 8x and 36 to make it 2x minus 9? Yes, we can. What can we do to factor out to give us negative 2? 2 times what gives you negative 8? We know that's negative 4. So therefore, that's the same as negative 4 times 2x minus 9 plus 9 minus 9. Do you remember? Negative 4 times 2x is negative 8x. Negative 4 times negative 9 is positive 36. And then multiplied by x plus 6 in the square root. All divided by 2x minus 9 raised to the 4th power. But if I were to write it in expanded form, I'll write it 3 more times just for you to have an experience. Okay? So yan, it will look like this. Take note that one of the 2x minus 9s will cancel. Diba? And then what we're just left na lang is 4 times x plus 6 all divided by 2x minus 9 raised to the cube. Diba? Because if I were to simplify it, that would be the answer. Alright? And if we are to write this in expanded form, remember what is our goal in the denominator? Yeah, in this problem, in here, there are 2 restraints of the domain. Because 1, we have a square root, and number 2, we have a denominator problem. So therefore, it's up to you to decide which one first. Like, I want to start off with the square root. So the square root we have here is this. X plus 6 should be greater than 0. You know already what to do here. So therefore, x should be greater than negative 6. Because in the square root, if we have negative 5, that'll be negative 1. If negative 4, hindi pwede yan. If negative 7, if negative 5, that'll be positive 1. If negative 4, that'll be positive 2. If negative 3, that'll be positive 3. And so on. Kung naging negative 7 yan, that'll be negative 1. So, hindi pwede. So, therefore, our domain in number 19 in this item should be greater than negative 6. But are we done? Not yet. Because we still need to work out in the denominator. Because in the denominator, we have 2x minus 9. We don't need to solve for all, but we just have to solve for only one. Because only one of them has the restraint. And they're all identical. So we have 2x minus 9 equals 0. Add 9 to both sides. Then 2x divided by 9 is equivalent to 9. Divide both sides by 9 by 2. Therefore, x must not be equivalent to 9 minus 2. If x were equivalent to 9 over 2, therefore, that makes the function undefined. So therefore, that's our answer. So therefore, what is the domain? The domain can be a set of, the domain should be greater than negative 6. Pero, even if the domain were greater than negative 6, it should not be positive 9 halves. That is the domain in this item. To check your answer, plug in those to see if they're extraneous. And if you get extraneous, that is the restraint of the domain. Yun lang. So that's number 19. It's a bit of a tricky problem, but at least we manifested to solve it. Last problem. And this one's the trickiest problem ever. In this problem, we have here 12x, negative 12x plus 44 cubed. Diba? It's being cubed on the positive side. And on the denominator, it's divided by 2x plus 10. Right? Pero that is not within the group because the exponent of 3, which you see here, is only for the numerator. It's not within the denominator. Unless the exponent were outside, then it has to distribute to both of the terms, numerator and denominator. But it only refers to the numerator. Kaya there's a difference between, let's say for example, do you remember, if you have something that goes like this, if you have 3 halves, such that your exponent is here, we know that's supposed to be 9 halves, diba? Pero if it were something like this, 3 halves, and then it's enclosed in parentheses, squared, the exponent of 2 is distributed to both denominator and numerator. So this will be 9/4. Okay? Kaya take note, there's really a difference. And that is, ano yun? That is, the exponent of positive 3, which you see here, is on the numerator side. It's only going to distribute to the numerator, not the denominator. So it does not even affect the denominator. On the other hand, we have 3x, and then it's being multiplied by 3x minus 11 raised to the negative fifth power. We know, remember last time when I told you, any exponent that is raised to any group or any number that is raised to the negative power is always 1 over that translated exponent in the positive form. Right? So it goes like that. And then on the denominator, we have 5x squared minus 33x minus 56. This is a bit tricky, so let's solve it. So let's do this. First, let's write the equation in expanded form so that you guys can understand the logic. So, remember sabi ko dito we have negative 12x plus 44 raised to the cube, diba? It goes like this. And then, remember, 3x 11 minus 5 is the same as, ano yun? Times 1 over 3x minus 11 raised to the fifth power. Diba? And then we have 2x minus 10 on the denominator, diba? So to look like this. And then multiplied by the entire quantity of 5x squared minus 33x minus 56. Alright? I think to keep things simpler, we can just factor something out. We can factor out the two numbers. Actually, we can do that. Because did you know the negative 12x plus 44? That can be written as 3x minus 11. How do we do that? We factor out negative 4. So factoring that out, we're supposed to get negative 4 times 3x minus 11. But actually, to be honest, that is in cube. So therefore, we have to put it like this. So that the exponent can be distributed. So that this would be negative 64. And this would be 3x minus 11 cubed. Right? And then we have a very long denominator. We have 2x minus 10 here. Ito siya. And then we have 3x minus 11. We have to write that 5 times. 2, 3, 4, 5. Diba? Just like that. And then we have to write another fraction here. So therefore, it's over. It's over 5x squared minus 33x minus 56. Okay? So therefore, if I were to distribute that 3, this would become negative 64. Negative 64 raised to the cube is negative 4 cubed is equivalent to negative 64. And then this would be 3x minus 11, 3x minus 11 again, and 3x minus 11. So take note, these 3x minus 11s cancel both numerator and denominator, which simplifies your equation to negative 64 over the square root of 2x minus 10. It's plus 10 pala, not minus 10. Plus 10. Plus 10 times, let me put down my phone para hindi kayo mahirapan. Wait lang ha. So yan, 2x minus 10, di ba? The square root of 2x plus 10. And then we still have that 3x minus 11 here. And then 3x minus 11 here. 2 times, di ba? Kasi na-cross out tayo dito ng 3. Tapos how many you cross out in the numerator, you should also cross it out in the denominator side. And then you still have 5x squared minus 33x minus 56. Right? So that is our denominator now. It should look like this. Hey, if you were to apply the laws of exponents, you can factor this out and then you can make sure it's negative 64 times, ano yun? 3x minus 11 raised to the cube, right? Raised to the cube. And then you just apply the laws of exponents. Because if you have the same basis, ganito siya. Diba, remember you have negative 64, diba? And that becomes negative 3x minus 11 cube. And then multiplied by 3x minus 11 raised to the negative 5. That's the same as adding the exponent. So you get negative 2. So meron kang dalawang 3x minus 11 doon sa baba. So now how can we solve for the answer? To solve for the answer, let's solve for one of them first. And we know that there are lots of restraints within the domain. So let's solve each one by one. First off, let's start off with the 2x minus 10. So we have this equation. Let me write it here. 2x plus 10 equals 0. Is greater than 0. We know that when we take the square root of any number, it should always be positive. Hindi pwede siya maging negative. Subtract 10 to both sides. We're supposed to get negative 2x is equivalent to negative 10. Dividing both sides by negative 2. Therefore, x, ayun pala, I forgot to tell you pala, that when you divide inequalities, if you're changing the sign, therefore, it should be, you have to change the sign. If you divide, change the sign. Right? From this one becomes less than. So, x should be less than 5. Like, for example, if x were 4, can that be done? 2 times 4 is 10. 8 plus 10. Pwede. Diba? Or pwede naman, or I think it's still the same. Kasi yan, we know naman it should be greater than 5 eh. We know it should be greater than 5. Because if it were 4, pwede pa rin. Or pwede pa rin, either way. Kasi dapat, I do not know how to divide inequalities eh. Kasi boy na naman, if you have inequalities, they said daw, yung ito, they will flip. Pero, I think you better ask the YouTube or the Google kung paano siya nag-flip. Kasi yan, kung mag-flip yan, dapat it's supposed to be negative. Let's say, for example, di ba, remember, if you have this one, if you have something like this, if you have negative 7, x, negative 7x, so equivalent to 14, then you divide both sides by negative 7, therefore x must be flipped to negative 2. Parang because the sign changed, that's the reason why you have to flip. But because in this one, we just divided by 1, so therefore it's supposed to be x is supposed to be greater than 5. So dapat, going back to the equation, dapat it can be 6, it can be 7. So dapat should be greater than negative 5. Because if it were negative 6, that would be, ano yun? So tama nga, it should be greater than negative 5. Negative 5, di ba? So negative 5. So negative 5, 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. plus 10 is 0. So tama, negative 6, negative 12, negative 2, extraneous. Diba? So dapat it should be more than great, should be more, so dapat we don't change the sign. The sign still remains the same in inequalities when you divide, unless you're dividing by a negative number. If you're going to change the sign. Just like that. So yun lang. Or let's say naman kapag, for example, this were negative 2x minus 10, or let's try naman, make it negative naman. Para you'll get the idea. Diba, remember, we make it negative 2x minus 10. Let's work it here na lang. So, negative 2x minus 10 equals is greater than 0. If you want to get the positive x, you can factor this out. Pwede ka mag-factor, and you can factor out negative 2 to make it x plus 5. X plus 5, and x plus 5 equals 0. So, dapat, we know that it should be greater than 5. Negative 5, di ba? So, yan. Di ba? Pero since it's negative, ganito siya. Negative 2x minus 10 is greater than 0. So, add 10 to both sides. I meant plus 10. I plus 10 pala yun. Sorry. Kasi di ba remember that's supposed to be negative 10. See, let's write it down again. 2x plus 10 equals 0. So, if I were to factor out negative, that would be minus 10. Minus 5 equals 0. And then we have x minus 5 equals 0. Plus 5. So, x must be greater than 5. Diba? X must be greater than 5 in this particular situation. So, that's the value of x. X must be greater than 5. So, therefore, if we have something like this, negative 2 times 5, that would be negative 12, negative 10. So, hindi pwede. If it were 6, so, hindi pwede to. Hindi pwede yung 6. Negative 2 times 6 plus 10. Yeah, pwede. Kaya that's why the sign changes. Kasi nga, diba, remember, kung naging negative yan, hindi pwede yan. So, that's why you need to factor this out and make it positive. Okay? I'm sorry if I hadn't changed that problem in a while. Now, let's go back now to what I was saying. So, therefore, that's supposed to be negative 2x minus 10. To negative 2x plus 10. Now, if I were to do it the normal way, subtracting 10 on both sides, we have here negative 2x is equivalent to negative 10. Divide both sides by negative 2. Therefore, the sign changes and makes it positive 5. So, yan. And therefore, x should be less than 5. X should be less than 5. So, therefore, dito, x should be less than 5 because if it were 2 times 4, negative 2 times 4, negative 2 times 4 is negative 8. Yan. Diba? If that were 6, dapat it's supposed to be negative 2 plus 6, that's negative 12. Negative 12 plus 10, that's negative 2. Extraneous na yan. Kaya we factor this out. Kung nag-factor tayo, that'll be x minus 5 equals 0. Then you, ano yun? Di ba remember nag-factor tayo? So that's supposed to be negative. Di ba? So you add 5 to both sides. So tama. X is supposed to be, ano yun? Less than. Something like that. I'm not so sure eh. Kindly watch lang YouTube videos about solving for inequalities. Such would use the multiplication division property. Then you'll get the legend, okay? Huwag na tayo sign yung oras dito. Let's move on to the next. Next, we have 3x minus 11. We know that the domain should not be equivalent to 11 thirds. So our domain should be less than 5. We know our domain should not be 11 thirds. Because remember, 11 thirds will make the function so undefined. Diba? Because that automatically becomes 0. On the other hand, what about the last one? Kung nag-5x squared minus 33x minus 56, this one implies the quadratic formula. Pero I think you can also apply factoring. But since our a is greater than 1, therefore we need to do the box method. The box method, we do a times c. 5 times 56. So 56 times 5 equals 30. 5 times 5, 280. So therefore, what two numbers that multiply together that give you 280 and that add to give you negative 33? There are lots of factors for 280. So how about let's try 14 and 10. 14 and 20. Nope, that's not it. First, let's hit on all the possible values of 280. So 1 times 280, 2 times 140, 4 times 70, 7 times 40, 10 times 28, 14 times, let's try 14 kaya. So 14 and 20 kaya. 14 and 20. Let's see if it makes sense. Kasi dapat we are supposed to add this value together to give you that multiply together to give you negative 280. Then at the same time to give you negative 33. So therefore we list down all the possible values. 1 times 280, 2 times 140, 4 times 70, 7 times 40. Yan. 10 times 28, 14 times 20. I don't think none of these will make sense. So if that were the case, I think let's just call it na lang extraneous. Extraneous yan. Ay, sorry pala. Meron. 7 times 40 pala. So dapat 40 and 7. Now we input this one. 2 parentheses. And then we write the original equation. 5x squared minus 33x minus 56. Diba? So this is supposed to be x, and we know that we are supposed to get 56 here. So dapat our sagot, what are the two numbers that we're supposed to get? It's 7 and 40. So dapat that's supposed to be 7 and 40. So 7 and then 40. So 40 can be broken down to 8. So tama. Let's try this one. Let's try to double check. X times 8x. Nope, that's not it. Dapat we try it in reverse. So dapat 8 dito tapos 5 dito. So tama. 8 times 5x. X times 5x, 5x squared. So let's do the multiplication. And we need to get negative. So therefore, this becomes 40x. This becomes yan. Let's see if we get it right. Let's do the long multiplication method. We have 5x minus 7 and then x plus 8. We're supposed to get negative 56 here. This is supposed to be positive 40x. This is negative 7x and then 5x squared. Then we add negative 56. This is negative 33x, 5x squared. So tama. So therefore, what are the x values? Let's solve. X should not be equivalent to negative 8 because x plus 8 equals 0. Subtracting 8, x must not be negative 8. On the other hand, 5x minus 7 equals 0. Add 7 to both sides. X must never be equivalent to 7 5s. So therefore, what is the restraint of the domain? The restraint of the domain is negative 8. 7 5s should be less than 5. And it should not be 11 over 3. And that's it. That's how we solve for the equation.